well. Cheers, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Hopefully Here. I am Hope. As always, super stoked to have you. And we're having a coffee, which is a shocker to no one if you've been here before, but hopefully a pleasant surprise if you're new. So, grab yourself your drink. Let's get into it because today we are doing some fantasy book recommendations. And I say fantasy very loosely because some of them are maybe more magical, some of them are maybe more speculative, but this is what has triggered this video. I have an incredible older sister, and we were talking on the phone over the weekend, and she was saying how she was in her fantasy era, and she's trying to just like read good fantasy. And I just thought it was really funny because I also feel I'm kind of in my fantasy era right now, trying to find good fantasy. And so I have some book recommendations for you, specifically my incredible older sister, but just in general, books that I have really enjoyed over the last few years, really, that if you're looking to maybe start reading some easier fantasy, these are not big epic sagas. This is not huge 1,000-page books. They're just books that I had a really fun time reading and think that you could as well. Let's get into them. Let's start with the ones that I have physically. And the one that I have most recently read and enjoyed way more than I thought I would is Carissa Broadbent's Nightborn Duet. So I read the first one, which is The Serpent and the Wings of Night. I think I read that in about 3.5, 4 hours. I read it super quickly, thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm now on the second book and also enjoying this a lot. And in this, there's vampires and magic and gods and goddesses and the good guys and the bad guys. And in the first book, there is a competition. I think I liked the first book more because I like the competition aspect a lot. But if you're looking for just something kind of fun, I guess actually, and this is to those of you who have read Court of Thorn and Roses, in what is it, A Court in Mist and Fury, when there is kind of games. Is that the first book or the second book? No, in the first book, when there is like a competition for Feyre, I feel like take Rysand, put him into the competition with Feyre, and then put them in the Hunger Games. But like all of them are voluntary tributes. That is the first book of the series. That was the most convoluted and weird description, but I really enjoyed this and I think you could too. Super quick read. We also have just collection as a whole if you're looking for a fun fantasy writer. And I know that you like dragons because I know what series you're waiting for the third book for. If you're looking for dragons, we have got, I said earlier, no massive books. That's obviously a lie. These are pretty big. But Samantha Shannon's The Priory of the Orange Tree and A Day of Fallen Night. Talking dragons. Like, do you need anything more? I don't think you do. So definitely a couple of books worth picking up there. Technically a series together, the Roots of Chaos series, I think. But as far as I know, this is absolutely a standalone book, and I actually haven't read this one yet. This came out second, but it is the prequel to this. I don't know, make sense of it, but Samantha Shannon is one of my favorite fantasy writers, and that brings me to her series, the Bone Season series, which I know, sister of mine, I have absolutely recommended to you before and will continue to do so, and that is this series here. Book 5, I think, is coming out in 2025. They are beautiful covers, and in this you are following Paige, who is able to walk into people's dreams. So you've got a lot of different abilities, telepathy, people who can kind of, be the vessel for ghosts. You've got people who can manipulate things. There's a lot of different abilities, and these people are being shunned. They're being sent to the underground, and the government is really trying to weasel them out and essentially kill them all off. And it's about her fighting back. And there are these other creatures that she needs to work with in order to kind of go after the Scion government. Anyways, it sounds complicated. It's not. It's really good. The dynamic between Paige and Articus, which is one of these creatures, is really fascinating, and I think the relationships between her and her other telepaths is interesting. I just really enjoy the series a whole lot and would definitely say it's one worth picking up. If, however, you were in the mood strictly for like magic, witches, vampires, then might I recommend the Deborah Harkness A Discovery of Witches series, which is now at 5 books. The original trilogy here follows, what is her name? Diana. Yeah, that's right. Diana and Matthew. Diana is a witch. She knows she's a witch, but she really hides her powers and has for a very long time because she doesn't want to get involved in the politics of that world, essentially. And Matthew is a vampire. And without knowing it, Diana at Oxford pulls a manuscript that turns out to be magical. And she's just doing some work. She doesn't realize the importance of it, but it kind of disrupts the magic around them. And so it brings all these creatures to her because they think that she has now been in possession of this magical document. She puts it back, and then when she discovers what the document is for, she tries to get it again, and she can't, essentially. And it follows her trying to protect herself and Matthew trying to protect her from the creatures and what this document means, and her trying to figure out what her powers mean. And so it gets pretty intense, as a trilogy would suggest. There's time travel, there's a love story. I don't believe it is a television show somewhere. I have never watched it, but I absolutely loved this series. And then this is kind of its own little standalone. And then this, I'm actually not sure exactly who it's following. Possibly their kids, but I really, really enjoyed it as a fantasy series, but just as a plain old magic series. I feel like it's a classic witch vampire setup and thought it was fabulous. Really, really looking forward to reading that one. Now, let's talk about the books that I don't have physically, but I still think maybe you would have a good time with. One is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I really enjoyed this book. You're following Lucia. Is that her name? Lucia. You're following Lucia, who can do little bits of magic. She's not like a super powerful witch, but she can do tiny little things like fix a hem or fix burnt bread. And she's living in a household that desperately needs some societal clout. And when her mistress finds out she can do this, she starts to take advantage of it. And Lucia really doesn't have a choice but to go along with it. But that brings the attention of a man who has a lot of power and another man who needs to regain favor with the king. And things get complicated, but I thought it was done in a really fun way. Again, there was a competition to see who's the one that's going to gain the favor of the king or the favor of the lords, and it gets messy and complicated. But what I liked about this one a lot is it's just a standalone. It's only one book, and I find in fantasy it's really challenging to find standalone books, and so I really appreciate Leigh Bardugo doing that. Now, Leigh Bardugo also has a couple of series out. I enjoyed her Six of Crows series, which is one you may want to look into. It is a YA series. I don't know where you are in the YA world, but if YA is something that you can still get into and enjoy, then I would say her Six of Crows series is kind of fun. I didn't love her other stuff, and I really haven't liked the Ninth House series. I've tried reading twice now and it wasn't for me, but this one I really enjoyed, and maybe you would too. Let's take a pause. I have my list written down here. Let's see what's next. Oh yes, another dragon book, To Shape a Dragon's Breath by, who's the author on this? By Monoquill Blackgoose. I enjoyed this book. I think what I liked most about this book is there is a lot of indigenous culture in this book. It's a lot about colonization and the English. It's so funny. It's the English, but in the book it's the English coming and really trying to establish rules in a place that they don't really have the right to do so, or putting expectations on these people without explaining anything. Not that they should have to explain, obviously, but it's about the English trying to take over this girl's world, and when she is bonded with a dragon, they get suspicious because the English have all these rules about what it is to have a dragon belong to you, and how did she find this dragon, and how did this work, because it's just against their rules. And she's like, what rules? I don't live under your rules. What's the thing going on here? And so it's a really interesting look at that relationship, but with dragons, and I think it could be a good one to read. Another one that has a lot of, I don't know if this is fantasy necessarily, it might be more like speculative or just alternative reality, I'm not really sure where you would put it, but Babel by R.F. Kuang is another, I would say, fantasy/fantasy adjacent book that deals a lot with relationships of colonization. So there is an underlying meaning in the book, but the overall world is still very fantastical, very different, and you're following a boy or a man who is learning the magic of silver. And it's a really fascinating look at the ownership of this magic and what happens when they try to take back the power of it. So I would say possibly Babel by R.F. Kuang is a book that you could also really enjoy. If you're looking for a bit of a lengthy number, The Book of Love by Kelly Link is one that I read this year and I had a pretty good time with. So this follows 3 children appear at a school one day, and they are 3 children who had been dead for a year. So they've been resurrected. They don't know what's going on. The people around them don't know what's going on because their whole year has shifted. Like, they don't remember anymore what's happened. And it's a look at these 3 kids trying to figure out why they're back, where they're back, what's going on, and trying to establish some sort of meaning in what has happened to them because they're confused. Everybody's confused, but clearly some dark stuff is happening, and I thought it was a pretty interesting book. It's quite long. I could possibly have made it like ideally maybe a little shorter, but I think if you're ready to just sit down and kind of be engrossed in a new world, The Book of Love by Kelly Link could be the one that you're looking for. Wayward by Emilia Clarke is not what I would consider fantasy, and again, I don't know exactly how these books are being categorized, but there is some magic undertones. And this follows a woman who is running away from an abusive relationship to a cottage that she has inherited by her aunt. But there is a story with this cottage and the women who have lived in it, and kind of just, they have some little magical inklings about them. And it's a really interesting story. I really liked it. It's a little bit, I mean, because it does deal with some subject matter, especially around abusive relationships, I wouldn't call it a light read or anything, but I would call it an easier read, and one that if you're just looking for kind of some light magic, could be worth looking into. Along with The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is a book that is so popular, and there's a very good reason for it. It is an easy read. It is cute. It follows, again, I hesitate to use words like cute because, like, I understand that there are the subject matter is not necessarily cute, but I think it is a cute, kind of cozier read, and you're following this social worker who needs to go check up on this house filled with children. They're magical children, and they're children that have been deemed dangerous to society, and he needs to go check up on them, and it's about him kind of forging bonds with the kids and with the man who runs the house, and their magicalness, and these kids not really understanding why people are afraid of them. It's cute, it's popular, it's an easy read, and definitely one that you could pick up and just sit down and read in a couple of sittings. Another really popular author, and this author has a few series that you could maybe look into, but the one book I'm going to recommend is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And this is a really interesting book because it follows a woman who, way back in the day, makes a deal, and ultimately what comes of it is nobody ever remembers her. They meet her, and in the one time that they're in the same room with her and they see her, they know her, but as soon as she's out of sight, they forget her. And so she's lived her entire life, eons and eons, because she's basically immortal, with nobody remembering who she is. And then it's a really interesting look at what that life is and how she kind of, like, why she made the deal to do this and what happens when after hundreds of years nobody knows who she is and how she gets out of things. It's really good. I was really surprised with this book. I was surprised with how much I enjoyed it, but it is definitely a darling. People really, really enjoy it, and I think that you would too. And then the final book of the Hey Older Sister, maybe you should check these out lists. We have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So Erin Morgenstern, I think, is probably most popular, most well known for The Night Circus, which I also enjoyed. And The Starless Sea, I'll be honest, I don't remember a ton about anymore, but I do know that I really, really liked it when I read it. And so you're following a boy or a man, young man, Zachary, who discovers like a magical book or something, and then things go off the rails. That's what I remember. Like I said, I don't remember a heck of a lot about the nitty-gritty details, except that I definitely enjoyed this book. Now, I will put a little caveat on this one. This is a divisive book. People love it. People also hate it. I happened to fall in the love category. So I won't be offended if you were to try it and not like it. But I think if you like The Night Circus, if you've read that, if not, you could also just read The Night Circus. She writes with just a little bit of kind of magical realism, just a little bit of fantastical elements, but not necessarily strictly in the fantasy realm. And so I find her very palatable, and her world building is easy. You're not getting into like epic, you know, stories that are 8 books long and you're building these incredible political systems and magical systems. I find her to be fantastical light, and I appreciate that very much. So those are my recommendations, specifically to you, but also to those in general who are still here watching the video. If you have any books that you think could slot into this list somewhere, let me know in the comments below. Like I said, I, as is my eldest sibling, are in our fantasy moments right now, our fantasy eras, if you will, and I'm always looking for some good recommendations. But in the meantime, I'm going to pick this guy up, finish reading it, finish Le Café, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.